We're going to start with Alejandro Garnacho, aren't we? And look, we know he's leaving Manchester United this summer, or is he? And that's the question here. Well, we know the links are there with Chelsea, and we know that that is his preferred destination. In fact, it's his only destination. And Fabrizio Romano has been speaking on, was it The Zone, I think, earlier on, and he says that Alejandro has given a message to Manchester United. I want Chelsea, or I stay here and don't play football for 6 to 12 months. You cheeky little fucker. Now, if this is true, and I don't see why it wouldn't be true, because, Fabrizio Romano is not going to put it out there, and he's not going to speak about it on a, on somewhere like The Zone if it wasn't true. But Alejandro Garnacho giving Manchester United an ultimatum like that is just so far outside of the level that he thinks he is. It's just unbelievable. And you know what? An awful large part of me wishes we didn't need sales as much as we do this summer, because I would love nothing more for to see him sit on the bench and train with the reserves and train with, the under 18s for the next 6 to 12 months. God. This is the kind of mentality that Ruben Amorim and Ineos and the powers that be at Manchester United are trying to weed out of the club. And in my opinion, they're doing a pretty good job of it. Now, there's a few left. There's one or two left. And if you go back to a couple of years ago, before Eric Ten Hag took over, and the whole Ranić era with Pogba, Lingard, Ronaldo, what happened with Greenwood, you had the whole Harry Maguire situation going on. Sancho was there as well. Rashford, it was just a nightmare. You were talking about leaks coming out of the dressing room. You were talking about, players not having respect for the badge, for their manager, for the, I suppose, their performances on the weekend as well. And I think we've done a pretty good job over the last couple of years of cleansing the squad. And we said that was needed, didn't we? Now, there was a number of reasons for, and there's some people left that need to be moved on, but for different reasons. Luke Shaw, for example, needs to be moved on because he can't stay fit. Casemiro needs to be moved on because he's getting old and he's on too much money. And these are the types of players that, look, you don't mind if they do continue with Manchester United, albeit not in a leading role, and you want to obviously rebuild and reshape the squad. But I think in terms of weeding out the bad eggs within the Manchester United squad, I think we've done a relatively good job on it over the last few years. There's a few left. There's one or two left. The bomb squad. Now, I feel sorry for the likes of Malacia and Anthony who get thrown into, the bomb squad, quote unquote, because, they're simply just not good enough. They're professional, and Anthony, for example, we've always said, works exceptionally hard when he's playing football for Manchester United, when he did play football for Manchester United. Ultimately, he's just not good enough. And Malacia had a massive injury, and he was always going to be a backup and so on and so forth. But the Sancho, Garnacho and Rashford were the three that needed to be moved on because of their attitude, because of their work ethic, and because of, their ego an awful lot of the time. And we're seeing absolutely massive ego here with Alejandro Garnacho saying to Manchester United that, I'll stay and sit on the bench for 12 months. I mean, first and foremost, there is an awful lot of power within the player side here. He doesn't have to accept any deal to move to another club. He's got a contract, and we know the power that players have. And ultimately, it's their decision on where they move. But, I mean, you've got a contract with Manchester United, and, I think, it's probably unfair to say that, he didn't fulfill his contract, because, the one thing I would say about Garnacho is that he was always available. He seems to be the type of player who just wants to play football. But his ego, he wants to be Cristiano Ronaldo, but he's acting like, fucking David Bellion. And I apologise to David Bellion if he's watching, because he might have been the utmost professional. You know what I mean? But in terms of stature and in terms of quality, I think Garnacho has no real guidance around him, for his agent to be allowing him to do things like this. And obviously, look, emotions were running high after the Europa League final when he said what he said. And I said it at the time, look, I didn't have a real big issue with what he said in the interview after the Europa League final, because, tensions are running high, and, you're after losing a final, and, you're after playing a lot of games in the build-up, and ultimately then you're dropped for it. But he seems to not have a good support structure around him. That's what I would say. Where are the people getting around him, advising him, going, don't put on an Aston Villa shirt? You know what I mean? Don't do any interviews after the game in the Europa League, because you're hot-headed and you might say something you regret. Don't be liking tweets that criticise your teammates or your manager. Don't be telling Manchester United that you're happy to sit in the bench for 12 months rather than, trying to find a move away. It doesn't look like he has that support structure around him. And I think if he did, we wouldn't be seeing these kind of things. And look, I think Garnacho is a fantastic footballer and he's got a really high ceiling. I don't think he'll ever get to the levels of Cristiano Ronaldo. I think he thinks he will, but I think it's quite clear that he won't. But I think ultimately he's got to be smarter, and he's a young man, and these young men who are multi-millionaires and are in the public spotlight all of the time, especially when you play for Manchester United, they need to have good support structures around them, and some of them don't, and that's why an awful lot of them fall by the wayside. Now, I'm not saying he's going to fall by the wayside, but it just seems like Chelsea would be the perfect fit for him. In terms of Chelsea love a mercenary every now and again, and look, I could see him going to Chelsea and being somewhat successful, whatever that entails, and how Chelsea got on. I think Chelsea over the next couple of years are going to be right up there in contention with some Premier League titles. But I can also see him going to Chelsea and just fading away, to be quite honest with you, and getting swallowed up. But that remains to be seen. I think his attitude needs to change, and he needs to realise that, he's not Cristiano Ronaldo, and he never will be, and that's where the support structure around him comes from, when he needs to have people advising him properly. Let's see what you guys are saying in the chat here.